A wow day for the Pacers as they accomplish two more things of their offseason to-do list. They extend Andrew Nembhard. I'm stunned. And they keep James Johnson as I kind of expected. And it's a huge deal. And the Pacers roster is all set. We'll explain it all, why it's so big, on today's Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, y'all? Happy Thursday, and welcome into another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and SI, and today, wow, do we have a lot to get to. Pacers stunned me specifically. Extend Andrew Nembhard's contract. I'll explain why I'm stunned when we get there. 3 more years of Andrew Nembhard with the Pacers. Huge success for them to do that. The last big line item of their offseason would have been that, and it's done. Pacers core looking very locked up for a long time. And then they did more. They kept James Johnson on a 1-year deal, which was announced later in the day. They have 15 players. They only have 2 more extensions available. They've done a lot of their work for the offseason, and a lot of it got done on Wednesday. So we'll get to all of it, why it's such a big deal, why I was so surprised, what it all means for the rest of the team, and what to expect going forward from this team in free agency and beyond into the season. We start with the big news, came out early in the morning. Andrew Nembhard, 3-year contract extension with the Pacers. $59 million is the reported number. I believe that the actual number is $58.65 million. Not that it's super relevant, but either way, 3 years, about $59 million for Andrew Nembhard on a contract extension. If you heard me talk about this, I said, I don't think this is going to get done. And if I were Andrew Nembhard, an advisor for him, I would not tell him to sign an extension with the Pacers. This is a huge win for the Pacers, massive win, because the way this works functionally, I don't want to get too in the weeds because that's kind of boring, but he's already under contract for 2024-25 at $2 million. That does not change. That contract amount is still the same. So what's going on here is he had a team option next year for 25-26. That is declined. That's gone. And it's replaced by this 3-year extension. So he has this season plus the 3 more years added, and he is now under contract for 4 years at a total of $60.67 million. That's an unreal good contract for the Pacers. Like that's barely over the mid-level exception. And the bet here is really interesting, right? So again, I'm getting too into the weeds, but I am just amazed that the Pacers were able to get this deal done. No options on it either. That would have been a way that I thought this could get done, would be a player option. It is 3 years instead of 4, which makes sense for Nembhard to get back out there in a couple years. So the reason that this functionally mattered and worked out was next year, Andrew Nembhard could have, and likely would have if there was no extension, become a free agent. The Pacers would have declined their cheap team option for 2025-26 because they could have made him a restricted free agent, whereas if he played out that year, he would have become unrestricted in 2026. Unrestricted is scary. So instead of having him be unrestricted in 2026, they now add 2 years past 2026, which is the pro for the Pacers beyond the cheap cost. Andrew Nembhard, who has basically only made $8 million in his career, gets an extra $60 million. That's a win. But the restricted free agency part of this is where I think that there was room for negotiation. Why I never ruled it out, even though, again, it absolutely stunned me, is because next summer he would have been a restricted free agent, and restricted free agents don't always get the maximum value. Now, what was going to happen on today's podcast, I said this, you can listen to older shows this week. I said, today, Thursday, we're going to talk about extensions, and we were going to talk about Andrew Nembhard and what the new Pacers reality meant for his extension outlook. And something I was going to bring up and was doing some research into is who has cap space next summer, not right now, next summer, that could actually sign Andrew Nembhard to a big deal. Because sometimes people talk about this, like, oh, this guy could get a big offer, but there's no team out there that's actually going to do it. It doesn't make sense, right? That was kind of the thing with Pascal this summer, is that there wasn't really another team that made a ton of sense to give him a ton of money. Someone would have, but the cap space teams weren't able to really dent the Pacers except for maybe one. Next year with Andrew, the Spurs, where he would fit awesome, would have had, without doing anything, and they could easily make more, $23 million in space. The Wizards would have had $25 million in space, and the Nets would have had almost $50 million. Those are 3 teams that are young and building and don't necessarily have a good lead ball handler on their team, or wouldn't next year in the Spurs case because of Chris Paul, and could have used him. Instead, Andrew Nembhard's going to make $18 million next season, right? So I thought because of that and because of the rising mid-level exception that this would not happen in this way. But the Pacers did it. They pulled it off, and that is huge for them. I think this is an awesome contract, right? Think about other starting twos that signed this summer. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope got 3 for $66 with a player option, right? That is more guaranteed money than Andrew Nembhard has over 4 years and has a player option, right? Malik Monk got 4 years with a player option. Andrew Nembhard has 4 years with no player option at less annual value average than KCP and just a smidge over Malik Monk. And that's the starting two-guard market. And he's 24, and those guys are vets and older, right? It's an awesome contract for a starting guard. Just unbelievably good. And I think the fact that he hadn't made much, of course, he fits well here and likes it here, just had an awesome playoffs, and restricted free agency meant he would likely have stayed with the Pacers anyway, meant lock it in now. Because there is always the downside risk of this kind of stuff where you say, I'm going to bet on myself. I'm going to go through the year before restricted free agency and bet on myself. And let's pretend that any number of these things could have happened. Drew had a bad year. Drew got hurt badly. Ben Mathurin has an awesome year. Or Ben Shepherd or some other young guy that has to get paid at some point. Any of those things happen, and all of a sudden, Andrew Nembhard's either not playing as much or isn't worth as much to the Pacers, and then the number of teams willing to pay him goes down. So there's always downside risk, right? I had a person DM me this today, and I thought it was actually a good kind of way of phrasing it. They said, tough to turn down a 10 times raise for the hope that you get a 15 times raise in a year. Now, I think that the floor for next year was probably still like a 12-ish raise. No, that's too high. The floor next year is probably like an 8-ish raise, 8x raise. But still, that was a good way of phrasing it. So I think the downside risk and all those factors I already said made it all kind of come together, right? The risks are the players like Klay Thompson, Dennis Schroeder, Buddy Hield from the Pacers, right? Got offered an extension with the team last year and then ends up getting less with Golden State. Gary Trent just signed the minimum, right? Those are the risks. The guys that can extend for a good amount and say, no, I think I can get more. And then they don't, right? And so that does exist. That is out there. And so it all comes together because of unique contractual mechanics, because Andrew Nembhard is good and the Pacers get him for a long time. This is an A move to me, as close to A. I mean, maybe A+, right? If it was 4 years with no options, I'd have given it an A+. Like, this is an unbelievably good move to me for the Pacers. Nembhard now can have this done before the Olympics. I bet it gets announced before they play their first game. That's just a guess, I guess. There's no reason why it would or wouldn't be. But and even the other thing is, for the Pacers, as they head into financial craziness, I just read this post from Law Murray, who covers the Clippers for The Athletic, about how many teams have, how many guys are on each team in the league from the last 5 years ago, right? It's fascinating. The Pacers' only two guys are Myles Turner and TJ McConnell. No team has more than 4, right? Like, rosters change fast in the NBA. Well, guess what? The whole life of this Andrew Nembhard contract is extremely tradable, right? Great value for the Pacers, very comparable to starting guards, and he's much younger than the guys who get them. And he attaches himself to the team through this core range. Let's talk about this. So now Andrew Nembhard's under contract through 2027-28. So is Tyrese Haliburton, Pascal Siakam, Obi Toppin. I went 4 years out. Andrew Nembhard is under contract through 27-28. For the next 3 seasons, so through 26-27, the Pacers have under contract Tyrese Haliburton, Pascal Siakam, Obi Toppin, Aaron Nesmith, Jarris Walker, Ben Shepherd, Andrew Nembhard, and Johnny Furphy. All those guys are young except for Siakam, right? Like, that's a core. That's a building thing. And they'll have to figure out Mathurin and Turner and McConnell along the way, and we'll get to that in just a second. But I think that is a wonderful core to start with, of youth, of a team that's already good. I think this is an awesome A+ move from the Pacers. And I am pretty surprised, as you've heard me say throughout the offseason, that Andrew Nembhard actually signed this contract. I did not think he would, but he did. And that's a massive, well, I guess he hasn't technically yet, but he will. Massive for the Pacers. Great for Nembhard to get the money. And now they can proceed forward with the knowledge that their backcourt's locked up, that most of their starting 5 is locked up for the next 3 seasons at least. Unbelievably good move for the Pacers. What does it mean for the rest of the team? And then we'll get into the other move they made today, signing James Johnson. So much more still to get to here on the Locked On Pacers podcast. We need to quickly, though, talk about Gametime, the authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Gametime app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets, and that sales pitch is spot on. I went to Wings versus Liberty in the Barclays Center in New York last summer. I used Gametime to get it. I figured out what section I was going to sit in. I like to sit in the lower bowl in the corners because those are cheap but awesome, and the view I could see on the app was perfect. I loved the all-in pricing feature that you can actually toggle on or off, but I have it on because I don't want surprise fees at the end. I liked that I knew I'd get credit if I found tickets cheaper elsewhere in the same section in a row for less, because that's their low price guarantee. They have so many more awesome features that you have to check out. It's the best place to buy tickets because you take the guesswork out of it. So download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA. You'll get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. We are back here on Locked On Pacers. Thanks for making us your first listen today and every single day. Your second listen should be Locked On Knicks. Tom Thibodeau, contract extension, much deserved. He is the perfect coach for the Nova Knicks. I'm very high on the Knicks' future, and they should keep Tom Thibodeau. He's a great coach for the squad that they have. Locked On Knicks, more on that decision in the Big Apple, which was the second biggest news of the day in my world because Andrew Nembhard took the cake by a mile early this morning, agreeing to 3 years, $59 million on an extension with the Pacers. So, great deal. He's locked up. What does that mean? Because you've heard a couple things on this podcast this summer that are all relevant to this, and there's a reason I really wanted to do these shows early. One was with Rhett Bauer, early July, about the center position, which we'll get to in just a second. But now, right, point guard, shooting guard, small forward, and power forward, the Pacers have guys and depth, right, on their team right now. And it's maybe not, between Shepard and Toppin and Walker and McConnell, they've got some stuff. And that doesn't even account for Mathurin, who could slide in as the depth at any of those positions, right? Like that's long-term depth at a lot of positions, right? The center is still up in the air. But Nembhard now, with his future settled, makes that all make sense. And so the other thing that mattered is the episode with Yossi Goslin the day after Rhett and I talked, which was about the luxury tax starting next season, right? And how close and hairy it's going to be for the Pacers to stay under it if their goal is to stay under it. They could go over it, right? The paying the tax gets less punitive or less punishing next year if you're just barely over. And yet the reimbursement currently projects to be massive because of the money that could be coming from the Boston Celtics or the Phoenix Suns. So a lot of factors at play for the future, and adding Andrew Nembhard's $18 million onto next season once again adds more to that discussion, right? Because now, if you are dumb and can't click two buttons at once, the Pacers have more money added to their books next season. So what does that mean for the rest of their offseason, right? So between Haliburton, Siakam, Toppin, Nesmith, Mathurin, Walker, Shepard, Nembhard, and Furphy, right? All of those players for the Pacers next season. I can't use Excel today. So pretend I just used it right and can tell you their guaranteed salary amount. They're about $31 million away from the tax with just those players. I did the calculations earlier. I wish I had the number in front of me, but I'm big dumb. So the reason that matters is because that $31 million from the tax does not include Myles Turner. It does not include $33 million. There we go. Does not include TJ McConnell. It does not include Isaiah Jackson. And it's only 9 players. So technically no James Johnson in there, no Kendall Brown, no James Wiseman either. And so it's getting tight to fit all that in, right? If they want to keep Turner because their center position is so up in the air, they have the only center on their team who has a contract for next year is James Wiseman, and it's only partially guaranteed, right? Is he even going to be on the team beyond this year? Who knows? If they keep Turner at the market rate centers just went for this summer, 25 to 30 million, that's all of it. They can't keep McConnell, and keeping Jackson will be hard. And then they'd have to fill out the last 4 or 5 spots in their team with just minimums. That also doesn't account for their 2025 first round pick that they still have. And they'll have a rookie skill amount in there, and they should probably keep cheap contributors if they can get it. So that is the most direct ripple effect for the Pacers. Is it makes their tax calculate. Look, this was the most Andrew Nembhard could make next year on an extension, right? So it is less than if he had potentially hit the open market next year. And in that way, it does help them with some flexibility here. But I don't think it's possible to keep even 2 of Turner, McConnell, and Jackson under that $33 million number, unless either someone is traded away or Turner takes much less than it currently looks like he could. So now the Pacers enter a time where it's going to be hard to retain everyone on their team. This was already the reality, but now it's trending even more that way with another guaranteed contract added for next year, albeit a very good one, right? You should keep very good contracts if you get it. So what does this mean directly right now? Well, there's two other players eligible for extensions, and we'll talk about that on Monday, in Isaiah Jackson and TJ McConnell. I think the odds either of them extend just went down. I thought McConnell pre-Nembhard was maybe the most likely Pacer to extend this summer. Now that's not the case because one, Nembhard already did, and two, the money is just a little tighter. It's just harder for it all to kind of fit in and come together. Maybe he still could if he would take not a lot, but why would he do that? Maybe he has another good season and gets paid because he was an in-demand player who was really good last year. And Isaiah Jackson is another one where he could be wanting playing time. He could be wanting money. So who knows what he would do if he takes a cheapo extension. Sure, he's a good young player, but I think the chances either of them get extended have dropped as a result of this because next year's tax is fascinating. So, Turner's got to get paid within a year. He can't be extended during the season because he was renegotiated. So he's going to be an unrestricted free agent next year. Other teams, including the ones I mentioned earlier, who have space. Does Washington need a center? Not really, unless they think Sarr's a 4. Maybe they do. Do the Spurs need a center? Definitely not. Do the Nets? Nah, maybe they have Nick Claxton. But the Jazz also have cap space. Walker Kessler kind of maybe on the market, but that depends on what happens with Larry Markkinen. The Rockets will have cap space. They have centers. But there's just a lot of ways this could go. And then Mathurin's the next year, right? So it's just hard to imagine they can keep their current entire rotational core for another 12 months. And this was already kind of reality before this extension, but now that it's locked in, it's really something they're going to have to think about. So I would not expect any other extensions this summer unless they're below market rate. And guess what? Andrew Nembhard's was below market rate. So to me, at least, clearly it wasn't below market rate because he signed it. But you know what? That's how this goes. That's how the business goes. And I think this was great business for the Pacers. In terms of other ripple effects, I mean, Mathurin's got to be thinking about what this means for his role going forward. I still think potentially his best role for this team could be super sub sixth man because Haliburton and Siakam will have the ball so much with the starting 5. And Nembhard could be a backup 1 in the future if McConnell is not retained. So all their roles are obvious to me. Mathurin's the guy who's got to be thinking about this now. But if he plays very well, he could work his way into maybe starting at the 3 or something like that. But it's certainly still a ripple effect for him going into next season. So he did it. Andrew Nembhard signed it. I was very surprised. But 3 years makes it a little less surprising, I suppose. He can get back on the market at 26 with 6 years of service. Pacers will have his full bird rights. And at that time, when he hits free agency, the only player currently with a contract for that year for the Pacers is Tyrese Haliburton. So if he has an awesome time, who knows? Similar to a Jalen Brunson contract path in the NBA, although he's a little older right now than Brunson was at this time. So Andrew Nembhard's back. Good for the Pacers. Ripple effects are many. We'll see what happens in the next year. More game time could matter for all of that. That wasn't the only thing that happened today. James Johnson is back with the Pacers, returning to the blue and gold. I talked about this a little yesterday when we talked about what Summer League meant for the back of the roster, right? Because James Johnson was at Pacers Nets, a Summer League game. He showed up with Obi and Pascal, right? He was a free agent, but clearly to me, I've explained this on this show, the Pacers salary structure looked to be very obviously set up to add a 15th player because they were exactly a minimum contract away from being $400,000 from the luxury tax. And there you go. They did it. James Johnson was that player. It just made so much sense that they would add someone with how deliberate their salary structure was. And James Johnson makes a ton of sense, right? They know what he provides. He likes being in Indiana. I'll talk about a quote he gave me last season in the next segment. Guys love, obviously, that he's around or they wouldn't keep signing him. This is his 7th contract he will sign with the Pacers in like 20 months. It's remarkable how much he and the team get along. So what does James Johnson mean for the roster? Well, how does this tax calculation shake out? Where can the team go from here? We will close out today's show talking about all of those things. Thanks for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day, your second listen. Locked On Thunder. Why? Because Shai Gilgeous-Alexander just said some nice stuff about Andrew Nembhard and Team Canada. They're on the same team. And the Thunder had a great offseason. Rylan Stiles can tell you more about it over at Locked On Thunder. Here at Locked On Pacers, more on James Johnson choosing to re-up with the Pacers, which, I mean, I kept saying it could be another vet if James Johnson maybe didn't want to come back or however that was going to shake out. But it was so clear that he would be the by far leading candidate for this. Gets along with this team so well, right? I could see it all the time. Great bench guy. He's always up. He greets someone coming to the bench from the court, says something to him. They always appreciate it, right? That kind of vet matters for these teams, right? You hear about it all the time. The Haslam guys, the George Hill guys, they matter for young teams like this. There's a reason the Pacers clearly value him. Again, this is his 7th contract with the team. The first one he signed was in September of 2022. So that's 7 contracts in 22 months. Basically, once every 3 months of the Haliburton era, the Haliburton Mathurin era, whatever you want to call it, they've signed James Johnson to another deal. So clearly something they love about him, right? When I was digging up stuff for, writing the why in a short story about them keeping him today, right? First of all, I talked to him last year, and the timing of when I talked to him matters because Tyrese Haliburton's had a big game, and Tyrese Haliburton was on the podium doing post-game media the day before, and he wore a shirt that had Tyrese Haliburton drawn on the shirt playing basketball, shooting into a hoop. And the drawing was made by James Johnson's kids. James told me that his son did it on an iPad. And he said, my sons draw Tyrese more than me, but they've never seen me play that much. They talk about Tyrese more than me. So the fact that he did that drawing, and he did do another drawing with James, of course. The fact that he did that drawing, with me in it and with Ty in it, like that meant a lot to him. And so I asked James about that, and he said it meant a lot to James that Tyrese wore that shirt to do media. And then I asked him about, hey, you've signed 6 contracts with this team. Like, what is that relationship like, having that trust and, still coming back, and like they keep treating you right through all these transactions? And he said, to have me back to keep helping these young guys get better is the biggest payment of all. That's obviously a little cliche. The money matters. But I think he truly enjoys this veteran mentorship role that he has. And he's been to conference finals. He's been on several teams. He's played with MVPs, Derrick Rose, down in the Heat with D Wade. And then here, right? Like, he has a ton of, I don't need to explain James Johnson's experience. It's wide and vast and valuable, clearly, to this team, which is why they're keeping him again in spot 15 when they signed him last year, the day of last December, after that Bucks fracas with the ball. I talked to Kendall Brown after that Mad Ends game. He said, great person, great vet. He's going to bring a lot of energy and toughness to the team. The toughness part really matters, right? He wore the security hat. The lot's been made of that. And I still wonder to this day, that game 6 moment against the Bucks, when Obi was getting into it with Bobby Portis for a little bit, and James Johnson steps up and walks out, and he gets the tech, right? This is such like a 1% chance this actually is what happens, but let's pretend James Johnson getting a tech and diffusing that is the difference between Obi getting ejected and not. And then they win that game and Obi plays well. Like, that is worth countless money. They won the series, right? So like that, he's a great guy to have around. He provides that kind of stuff, a stabilizer. Team loves him. Great. Keep that player no matter what, especially because whatever they're offering with their 15th spot, that player's not playing anyway, right? So no problem with it at all. I don't think anyone can really have, right? Clearly the team values him a ton. The players value him a ton, and he values being in Indiana a ton. There's not a lot of basketball part to talk about. He's played 28 games, I think, including the playoffs in his 2 years with the Pacers. He had that one start in Portland, and last year he played even less. So who knows how much he'll actually play this coming season. But either way, I find it very telling that they keep turning to him and keeping him and making sure that he's in the mix. I described this shirt incorrectly, by the way, but whatever. You need to see it. There's no picture of James Johnson playing the way that his son drew the picture. You should go find the article. I'll post it in the comments here. So what does this mean for the Pacers roster? They now have 15 guys under contract, including James Johnson. So their back end is now filled with Wiseman, Kendall Brown, and James Johnson, which means their offseason was Furphy in, Wiseman in, Jalen Smith out, and Doug McDermott out, and then the two-ways are shuffled. This does prevent any of the Enrique Freeman, Tristan Newton, Oscar Tshiebwe, Quentin Jackson quartet from getting a roster spot unless someone else is waived. So those are the guys in the mix for a two-way spot, which is worth keeping an eye on. That'll be kind of one of the next things to note for the Pacers offseason. But anyway, It was reported by Woj. I want to clear something up because people were confused about this. That James Johnson is signing a 1-year, $3.3 million contract. And that's true. He is signing a contract that's 1 year in length, and that deal will pay him $3.3 million. But I've been stressing a lot, for those of you who listen a lot to this show, that the Pacers have room for one more guy on a contract that is a 1-year minimum, because 2-year minimum deals don't have this feature. 1-year minimums do. The league has said it. So if you sign a player with 2 or more years of service to a minimum 1-year deal, their cap hit and how much a team pays them is only as much as the 2 years of service minimum, and the league reimburses the rest. So because this is a 1-year minimum deal, while Johnson will make $3.3 million, the Pacers are only going to have to pay him $2.087519 million, and the league pays the other $1.3 million. The reason that's a rule is because the minimums are scaled up based on experience. If teams are close to the tax, the league doesn't want them to be incentivized to intentionally sign a player of a certain, experience level, right? They don't want young guys to have favor in that way. And so it makes it plausible to do this, to sign veterans and not have them be more expensive. So people saw $3.3 million and said, oh, they're over the tax now. No. It only counts $2 million against the cap, and then the other $1.3 million is reimbursed by the league. And so because of that feature, now with 15 players, the Pacers are exactly, per my calculations, maybe off by a couple dollars, but this seems intentional enough that I think I'm right, $400,000 from the luxury tax, with non-guaranteed deal for Kendall Brown, which could create some wiggle room, $500,000 guaranteed for James Wiseman, which is a way to create some wiggle room if they need to. And I don't know if James Johnson's contract is guaranteed or not. I was not able to find that out today. I would suspect that it's not, just like last year. If you recall, last year he was non-guaranteed. They waived him, and then they did the 10 days, and then after the trade deadline, they brought him back, but they actually waived him after his contract was guaranteed because he made it past the guarantee date, but then they did the Pascal Siakam trade. I'm explaining a little too much here. All that to say, I bet his is a non-guaranteed 1-year minimum, because that's what it was last year and the year before that. Perhaps it's not. Does it functionally matter? What does matter is it's a 1-year minimum, which means they are under the tax. They would not have gone over the tax to do this. So that's why the function of the length matters, and why the reporting is accurate. He's going to get paid $3.3 million, but the Pacers aren't paying all of that, and the cash paid is what you're taxed on if you pay the tax. So that's why this makes sense to do, and why I kept saying they have room for a 1-year minimum. I stress that every time, if you can go back and listen, and they did it. James Johnson back with the team. They are now at 15 guys. So remember, I said this yesterday. They can have up to 21 in the offseason. And they have 3 2-way slots available, and then 3 whatever slots, right? Exhibit 10, or a player they want to compete in camp, or whatever they want to call it. So they don't have to be, air quotes, done for the offseason, right? We've already heard some Exhibit 10s rumor. That doesn't mean those guys will be in camp. But after Kendall Brown Summer League, which we talked about yesterday, with the 2-way stuff up in the air, there's a lot of ways their offseason could kind of wind and go, and who they could sign and what could happen. But their roster looks, especially given the intentionality of their salary structure, looks pretty set. This looks like the team they'll have with, like I mentioned earlier, Jalen Smith out and Doug McDermott out, and Johnny Furphy and James Wiseman in. So getting younger at those spots, making some sense. And now they proceed forward with this group, with tweaks still possible because of guarantees with Kendall Brown and the 2-ways in the back end to figure stuff out. But I think James Johnson made a lot of sense, as I talked about before. I thought this was a possibility a lot of the time, given how their structure is set up. And now it's officially, well, reportedly officially done. We'll see when it actually comes to fruition. Good for James Johnson. Good for the Pacers. And now any other offseason minutia will be about 2-ways, will be about Exhibit 10s, will be about extensions. We'll talk about that extensions on Monday, and then we'll do one more offseason-y thing later in the offseason until something happens, though. Getting close to the end of talking about contract stuff for the Pacers, because their team is pretty much done. Tomorrow, we're going to do a show combining 3 conversations I had with people who covered new Pacers at their old stop. So deeper dives on Johnny Furphy, on Tristan Newton, and on James Wiseman. Maybe we'll do another one of those later in the offseason if the Pacers add enough new players. And then I'll be on vacation, so Monday's show will be about contract extensions. We'll see if anything else comes out or is specific that needs to be addressed. But that would be what you can expect then, but expect it to be maybe a little shorter because of that, and then back Tuesday on a normal schedule. Thank you guys for listening today. Lots of big news for the Pacers. Nembhard extended, James Johnson back. Plenty more time to deep dive into that as the offseason progresses. If you have any questions about any of this stuff, I'm on Twitter at Tony R. East, and the show is there at Locked On Pacers. If you're on YouTube, comment them down below. Thank you all for listening. Have a wonderful day. We'll see you very soon.